This is a keyboard that completely rewrites the rulebook and looks like nothing you've seen before. But in spite of this, it's actually remarkably easy to switch to. I was up to 80 words a minute after just 5 days of using this. I think a lot of people look at this and think it's just some sort of extreme solution for extreme cases of RSI. And of course, while that's true, I look at it and see some sort of perfect solution to this lifelong pursuit of mine to find a keyboard that reduces finger movement to such a level that it's just effortlessly comfortable to type on for extended periods and guarantees that I'm not going to get any sort of RSI in the future as well. If you're new here, I'm Ben Valak and I'm a software developer, and I use this channel to use that developer mindset to explore all kinds of day-to-day optimizations and workflow improvements. And over the last several years, optimizing my computer keyboard has been one of those things that I've been exploring. And I actually took this to quite an extreme level and made my own keyboards and reduced the number of keys on those keys in an effort to reduce finger movement. This was my primary goal, because that feeling of using a normal keyboard when you have to stretch your pinkies out to the keys of the modifiers and the shift key on the sides of the keyboard was just such a horrible experience. I really wanted to experiment reducing that right down, and I ended up with a 2-layer keyboard. So the alpha letters split over 2 layers, and it actually ended up with only 16 keys. And I sort of dabbled with this and tried 18 keys as well for all. And I used this, I was typing at 80 words a minute on this thing. It was, very interesting, but it was quite frustrating. It was very error prone. The 2-layer thing is quite a mental overhead to pull that off. So I ended up going back towards 30 keys, 32 keys, this kind of a layout. But I've always been absolutely fascinated by this idea of reducing finger movement as a way to increase comfort while typing. So what's interesting is I'd overlooked this keyboard, I'd sort of seen it, but never really thought about seriously using it. And I feel bad because the creator of this apparently tried to reach out to me a year or so ago, and I just sort of missed this, and maybe I glanced at it and thought that it wasn't for me or something. But I think what had actually happened was I was overlooking this because it's clearly not a portable keyboard, and portability has always been one of these things that I thought I wanted out of a main keyboard, because if I was going to learn something sort of radical and new, I knew that I wanted to be able to just take it with me and stay using that whatever I was on, if it was an iPad or whatever. But I've since started using Kanata with a normal laptop keyboard to use my custom layout on the hardware that comes with the normal laptop. And this has been such a game changer because I can now look at normal laptops as the portable keyboard, using the keyboard that they already have. So I'm no longer pursuing this idea of the main desktop keyboard needing to be portable, which means you can look at something like the Svalboard as a desktop setup and not worry about that. And this, of course, ties in wonderfully to these themes that I explore on this channel, like using the Unix philosophy, which is this idea of separate tools doing one thing and doing one thing well. So instead of trying to find a keyboard that does the portable thing and the desktop thing well, I can now just concentrate on the two separate devices, the laptop being the perfect portable device and the Svalboard quite arguably being the perfect desktop device. I was sent the Svalboard for free and I can keep it, but the deal is it's mine to keep if I'm going to use it and I genuinely enjoy it. If for any reason I don't, it's not mine to sell on. I will have to send it back. So I think that's a nice way of looking at this. I really appreciate being sent it, and I hope that kind of nuance around that deal reassures you that this is absolutely not a paid piece. There was no expectation for me to do a video in exchange for this sort of trial period. If I didn't like it, I could have sent it back and I wouldn't have had to do any sort of video. So what's fascinating about the Svalboard is it's clearly an ergonomics first sort of approach. It's designed around our finger positions and our ability to move our fingers. So it starts with that. So it looks at the fingers. We've got the thumb and the 4 fingers on each hand, and then it says, okay, what are reasonable movements you can make with those fingers? And then it creates keys around that. So each of the fingers has 5 keys of its own: the normal down press, and then the flick movement and the curl movement, and then these lateral movements as well, which is fascinating because all of these movements essentially feel like home row positions. They're as easy to tap as a home row on a normal keyboard. They are just right there. And this increasing of resolution of the different things that you can fire with your fingers from that home position is what's so fascinating about this, because it means there's no difference in distance no matter which key you're firing. So this idea of a roll where you quickly roll through, on the home row or a top row or bottom row, when you're just rolling your fingers, this idea of being able to hit those keys super close together, that is extended with this to all of the keys, because that distance doesn't have any variance between keys. You haven't got to sort of predict in your head how long it's going to take to land those keys so that they land in the right order. And this is just such a key sort of way of thinking about this, because as I've been experimenting with normal keyboard layouts, what I found is the faster I get, the harder it is I find it to get the keys to land in the right order. My most common mistakes when I'm typing faster is that keys will go in the wrong order. And I put this down to this fact that with a normal keyboard, you have to stretch up to the top row or stretch down to the bottom row. So that takes a varying amount of time time from when you fire the movement in your fingers to when the keys land. And that means you've got to really work quite hard to get them to land in the right order. With the Svalboard, the distance is the same no matter which key you're firing. So as soon as you hit that impulse in your fingers, it then just becomes a matter of course that they're going to land in the same order. This was just a really fascinating thing to me as I kind of saw the way this was working. So with a normal keyboard, the kind of approach is you start with the keys. Like, someone designs a keyboard, we know all of the different keys that need to be pressed. So they thought, okay, well, what's the closest we can do? We've got to put all these keys down. How can we make that ergonomic? Well, there isn't really any thought into making it ergonomic at all in the case of the standard keyboard. It's just purely how can we fit all these keys in the size of a laptop, to the point where you have arrow keys on the Mac laptops just being an afterthought, squished up. There's no thought to the ergonomics. You just have to deal with it. And of course, it's possible to type quite fast on a standard keyboard if you spend your life pursuing this, but the cost is this extreme potential for discomfort through all the stretching and the modifier positions. It's just basically a nightmare. Svalboard flips this on its head completely and starts with your ergonomics first. And then you can work out how the layout works with that afterwards. And of course, that's the easy bit. The custom keyboard community has already got all these well-established approaches to dealing with custom layouts and layer shifting and home row mods and using thumb keys to switch layers and all these kinds of things. And of course, the Svalboard has an amazing set of thumb keys. So there's really no difficulty in using custom keyboard principles to create a layout that works incredibly well on Svalboard. And of course, the reality is most layouts will translate to Svalboard with very little modification. We'll get more onto that in a bit. So because of this ability for the keyboard to deal with incredibly fast consecutive rolling of keys, which is the case with normal keyboards, when you type, you will actually overlap your keystrokes, and that's not a problem. They just fire the keys in the order that they're pressed, and that's okay. But that principle in Svalboard, because each of the keys is the same distance away from essentially your resting position, you get this kind of feeling that you can almost think of it as like a chord. You can almost think of it like steno, where you're typing lots of different key combinations at the same time. You just do that almost in the same way. Of course, you are actually still rolling, but it feels much more like that's what you're doing. But on words where you don't have to use the same finger more than once, it really does feel like that. And you can just bash out these words so quickly and so effortlessly. It's quite a fantastic feeling. But of course, there are plenty of bigrams and trigrams that don't reuse the same finger. So you do get this feeling even on any layout. So one thing that's interesting about this, of course, is the top row, the north keys as they're called on Svalboard, is actually a flick motion with your fingers. It's the extension part of that movement that triggers the key. And of course, you do this same movement with a normal keyboard when you reach for the top row. It's just that it doesn't normally trigger the key until you then push your fingers down. But the interesting thing about sort of missing out that second part of the movement is if you have to repeat a key on the top row, it is quite awkward. There's something very sort of unpleasant about having to flick forwards twice. It's fine just once as part of another movement. It doesn't feel problematic at all, but on a repeated key, like I have L on my layout on the top row, to do that twice with my ring finger especially is rather awkward. So what I've done is actually add a repeat key to my layout, which is something I've dabbled with in the past, and it is an incredibly fun thing to do. So it will just repeat your last key. So to do a double L, I just do the one L and then hit the repeat key with my thumb. And of course, because there are so many thumb keys, it's very easy just to add that to an existing layout without any kind of knock-on effect. So with the Svalboard, we've got this entire new set of keys that just don't exist on a normal layout. And that's these lateral keys that are essentially in between the normal columns of your layout. And I was a bit concerned about this. This was one of my primary concerns. So I looked at that, I thought, actually, lateral movement is something we try and avoid normally. It's a lateral stretch that you want to avoid. Something like reaching over for shift on a normal keyboard. That far-reaching movement, especially with your pinkies, is horrible. And I've spent my life trying to eradicate that from all of my layouts. So obviously you have to use some of these additional lateral keys to map the keys that have been displaced. So we have no equivalent on the Svalboard for the top and bottom rows of your inner columns. So those 4 keys need to be moved. So normally what people do on this is they just put this on those lateral keys. And I've had no problem using that. And we'll get more onto that when we talk about sort of learning layouts on this. But essentially that's the sort of approach. I think a lot of people might look at this and think this is a main problem. You've got to displace these keys. What have you got to do? You've got to put them on a lateral key. Is that a problem? It's really not a problem. Those lateral keys are very natural to use. I think actually we don't use lateral movement much with a normal keyboard. I think we actually in reality do much more than we think we do. On a normal keyboard, when you have your fingers at that diagonal position to try and keep your wrist neutral, which is the way I talk about using normal keyboards quite often. To reach those keys, there is lateral movement all the time in your fingers. It's something we are doing all the time when we're typing. So that tiny little lateral movement in the Svalboard is an absolute non-issue. So I think it's hard to overstate the significance of what we're looking at here in terms of the key position around your resting position for your hand. So every key is more or less the same distance to reach. And then you've got this interesting effect with the keys themselves. So these are magnetic keys. They're basically just free floating in the housing, and there's a magnet that holds them in their closed position. And you fire them by breaking away that magnet force. And that means as soon as you start moving the key, the force gets immediately lower. So the maximum force to move the key happens right at the start, and then because it's a magnet, the further you push it away, it just reduces and reduces and reduces. So they feel very light very quickly after that initial breakaway force. And the initial breakaway force can be adjusted in the 3D printing of these keys. So if you just increase the offset between the magnets, you'll reduce that breakaway force, and they can feel really, really quite light. The default is still that they are very, very light. After you use one of these, going back to a normal butterfly keyboard on a Mac laptop, those keys feel heavy. And, of course, the butterfly keys are pretty light, but they feel really, really heavy after going to a Svalboard. So that's just a kind of representation of how light it feels to type on this. We haven't even talked about this yet, but one of the most important elements of this is the Rollerballs, of course. So and another one of the things I've been striving to do over the years is reduce this movement between keyboard and pointing device, trackpad or mouse. This is just a repetitive movement that's incredibly disruptive to the way I feel like using computers. I've always hated it. I was very excited to see the ZSA Navigator get a Rollerball, and that positioned it very close to the keys. I still had to move slightly from my home row to reach it, but it was a massive improvement. This takes this a step further and actually allows you to have the Rollerball in use from the resting position. So obviously you have to move your fingers to the ball from your home key position, but you don't have to move your hand. Like, your arm stays in the same position. Maybe you can introduce a slight movement if you want to, but essentially it's as close as you could hope for. And of course, it's only possible because of this key cluster idea, where there is space, below your home row position for these Rollerballs to go. And you get one on each hand if you spec the thing like this. And this is just incredible. You can have, your omnidirectional scroll on your left hand and your point on the right. And the way that it works in terms of the layer switching, so with, obviously there are no sort of dedicated click keys. The idea is use your normal keys for the click action. I think this has always been a fantastic idea about combining a Rollerball with a keyboard. This works really well. So what happens is, as soon as you move one of those balls, it will switch into the mouse layer. That's where you then have those keys switch to the click events. The problem with that normally is this idea of a timeout. So you have to wait after you stop moving it for it to switch back to the normal layer. Well, the setup in Svalboard works really nicely. So there's a way of setting this up on Svalboard that seems to be used by most people who use it, and that is just to set up all of the keys on the mouse layer to be transparent. And what that does is it means from the mouse layer, you don't have to wait for any timeout at all. You can just hit a normal key and that will be transparent. So it will immediately fire from your primary layer. So you can essentially type through this mouse layer. It switches back to the normal layer at that point, at the same time as firing the key beneath. So it's completely seamless. You can just type on this, you can mouse on this. There are just no weird things that happen as a result of it switching between the pointing layer and the normal typing layer when you use this. Your click events are available as soon as you start moving the ball, and then they switch as soon as you start typing on any other key. And obviously that does mean you have to kind of consider it's better to use a key that isn't one of the keys that you might start typing on. So I've got all of my letter keys completely transparent, and I use a thumb key for my main click. So on my main layer, I have a repeat key, which is just repeating the last letter. When I switch to the mouse layer as a result of moving the ball, that turns into my main click. That works incredibly well because it never conflicts. It never hijacks what I expect to be a key press. If I'd mapped the click to any of my letter keys, obviously there's a chance that if I wanted to type a word that started with that, it would stay in the mouse layer and just click instead. This avoids that problem completely by using a key that would never be the first letter I would start typing. So that works incredibly well. I think this is just such a seamless approach to combining a keyboard and pointing device in one. Having these big Rollerballs right under your hand, it's very hard to understate the significance of this in terms of that feeling of being able to operate the computer without constantly moving between a pointing device and a keyboard. So there's another interesting thing with these Rollerballs. There are two kinds of Rollerballs you can get. You can get these resin ones, which look amazing. They have this sort of 3D, they're solid. You can see the flex inside as you look into them. The problem with these is the optical tracking stuff doesn't work very well on them. If they're dry, it won't work at all. You can move it and it just starts skipping around. It's kind of like, whoa, this is broken, What you actually have to do with these resin rollerballs is put oil on them. That then fixes the optical sensor. This was the most crazy, hilarious thing. When I first jumped into the community with this, I'm sort of explaining that I've got this jumping mouse, and they're like, you need to lube your balls. So it's like, okay, well, what are you talking about? And it gets weirder because they say forehead oil is the best thing to do with this. So you're taking the ball out and you're rubbing it on your face. And it's almost like someone's setting you up for a joke, but it isn't. It's a genuine thing. The oil on the ball will fix this tracking thing, but of course it needs to be replenished every couple of days. So it's a little bit of a high maintenance thing. If you want to go for the resin balls, which look amazing, you do have to keep this in mind. And I've tried using jojoba oil on them as well. That works really well, but much easier than just sort of wiping it on your face. This was just in a kind of hilarious sub-world of using this keyboard. But the painted balls with the metallic fleck in the paint have no problem. They will work just dry. So if you don't want that strange high maintenance area of using the rollerballs, don't be tempted with the resin ones. Just stick with the normal painted balls. You can also get these with track pads or track points in this position as well. I think there's a general trend and agreement that most people using these are thinking the rollerballs are just brilliant. There's no real advantage to switching to a trackpad. You're not going to get that same kind of gesture support that you get with, say, a native Apple trackpad or anything like that. It's still kind of much more limited than that. So I think for me, the rollerball approach is definitely the best. And it is really brilliant having one for scrolling and one for pointing. And the utility of this pointing setup increases with the sniper key setup. So I have a couple of keys on my left thumb that I use to enable the sniper key, and that just slows the pointer down. So if you want to increase the accuracy, obviously it's quite fun to have it pretty fast for normal sort of jumping long distances, and then you can increase the accuracy just by holding down the sniper key. This works incredibly well for things like Final Cut Pro when you're adjusting a clip and you want that sort of frame by frame precision on your normal pointing device. You can just slow it right down with the sniper key, and there's a couple of different levels to have it really super slow, so you can just be moving it a couple of pixels with that precision and control. That's just an amazing thing to see on this as well. So one thing to talk about with this whole rollerball in the keyboard thing, on my setup I have this long arm. There's very little stability there. Even if I rest the thing on a stool, I can firm it up quite a lot like that. But with the ZSA Voyager, for example, I would type away, and the force needed to type the keys, and especially at speed where I get a little bit heavier, it was enough to switch into the mouse layer, which kind of caused a few problems because I was actually using on the Voyager letter keys for the click events. So obviously it would start clicking when I was in the middle of a word. That was quite annoying. And with the ZSA Voyager, the ball would fall out if you used any kind of extreme tent. Well, the Svalboard solves these problems by using 4 points of contact on the thing that holds the ball in. It is no problem to use this with an extreme tent. And I've found no problem with this typing on my wobbly arm either, because you're using these palm rests. That increases the stability, combined with the fact that the typing itself is so light. There's very little sort of extra movement through the keyboard as a result of typing. I haven't had one issue where it's switched into the mouse layer accidentally. The next thing we need to talk about is customization. Now, this is hilarious. So obviously I've lived and breathed this idea of building custom keyboards where you want to try and build a keyboard that fits your anatomy, the offset in your columns to match your pinky length, and you tune all this. But the reality of doing this in a DIY context where you're building a keyboard is you have to make these decisions at the design stage, and then you order your PCBs, which holds the keys in those positions. And this is a process. You have to buy 5 PCBs as a minimum each time. It takes time for the shipping, and you realize it's not quite what you wanted, so you have to go back to the drawing board and rebuild the whole thing. So Svalboard flips this on its head, and it's completely infinitely adjustable forever. So the idea with this is you continually tune this to get it exactly right. Obviously, as time goes on, you will start tuning this less and less, but sometimes you might want to revisit something. As you get older, things go wrong and your movement changes and injuries happen, and the ability just to fix that through an adjustment on the keyboard without having to redesign something is just absolutely incredible. And of course, if you get serious injuries as well, and you lose the tip of a finger or something like that, you can make the changes necessary to kind of accommodate that as those life events happen. So this is really a keyboard forever. Once you get one of these, I see no reason you'd ever need to change this idea of, it's not quite the right shape or size for your hand. It's never going to be a problem because it's completely adjustable forever. So this is really important. We mentioned this idea of keys landing in the order you expect them to because of this sort of consistent distance. Of course, if you find your resting position isn't quite what you thought it was, you might need to adjust those key positions to make sure that effect actually happens. And it can be this kind of ongoing process of just getting this exactly right. As you get faster, you'll find these tolerances and things may shift from from where you were when you were slower. So you can continue to adjust the board to accommodate those changes as you get faster. So what's been fascinating about this is the process of learning to use this keyboard is much less taxing than I thought it was going to be. You know, you look at this and you think this is just so radically different to a normal keyboard. It's going to be a long road ahead. For me, it really wasn't. I think it's an interesting mindset. Now, obviously, I've changed layouts a number of times over the years, and I have found that every time you do this, it gets easier to learn a new layout. And there's this very weird state of mind that you kind of foster in this process. It's kind of this combination of concentration and letting go at the same time. And you're quite aware of this when you're learning Svalboard, and in particular because you're actually reusing your existing muscle memory quite a lot. But if you overthink it, that will start to trip you up. It's almost like you just want to pretend to some extent that you're still just typing on a normal keyboard, because it is mostly the same movements that you need, and you just have to sort of have confidence in the fact that it's going to work on Svalboard. And so that sort of letting go of your propensity to overthink it goes a long way when you're learning this. Now, I was up to 70 words a minute on day 2 of using this, which blew my mind. I was really not expecting this. And then by day 5, I was hitting 80 words a minute. So it's been much less taxing to me than I thought it was going to be. But this is, I think, in part because I'm using graphite, which minimizes the inner column keys quite a lot in that layout. That means those 4 keys that get displaced from a normal keyboard to the lateral keys in Svalboard aren't used that much. So I haven't had to sort of think about that a lot. That's been quite important. Obviously with QWERTY, we've got B and N on the inner columns. Those are keys that you're going to remap to lateral keys. So you're going to have that slight extra overhead as a result of the more frequently used keys moving to laterals if you're sticking with QWERTY. And then of course, we've got this whole idea that what works for a standard layout, you know, the problems that keyboard optimizers will optimize layouts for isn't necessarily the same things that is optimal for Svalboard. Now, this is something to consider, but again, not to take too seriously. Svalboard works clearly with any layout. If it works well, as if you like the layout on a normal keyboard, you're going to like the layout on Svalboard. It's not so much of a drastic situation that you need to think there's no point in having this keyboard unless you learn something highly optimized for Svalboard. But it is very interesting exploring how a layout that is optimized specifically for Svalboard might look a little bit different to a layout that's optimized for a flat keyboard. Sort of minimizing repeated keys on the top row, for example, and then obviously we've got the laterals in play as well. So there are kind of a few different variables that you might start to look at if you were developing a layout specifically for this. But I think that really the most important thing if you want to switch to one of these is don't change your layout at the same time as changing the keyboard. Get comfortable with that using your existing muscle memory, and that's what's been quite amazing about this, is how little extra effort it's taken just to use my normal layout on Svalboard. Now, one thing I am finding with this is the error rate is quite high, and I think this is down to essentially the increase in tolerance. Everything is much closer. There's much less room for error, literally, when you're typing on this. Any small mistake is immediately reflected in a miss stroke, whereas on a normal keyboard, you get that extra time for your brain to react to your fingers moving in position. You can kind of feel if they're going wrong and correct it before it has time to hit the key. That effect doesn't happen with Svalboard. If you mismove, you fire the key. This increase in tolerances means you have to sort of increase your accuracy earlier on in your finger movement. And I think that's essentially the thing that you're training the most when you're learning to type on Svalboard with accuracy. But what is very striking as you learn to use this is this idea that every key pretty much feels like a home key in terms of its effort. They are all right there, not just under your fingertips, but just near your fingertips in all the different directions. And that is just absolutely fascinating. We spend so long optimizing normal keyboard layouts to prioritize the home row. Now every key is prioritized in the same way, and that's just incredible. So one of the things that's become clear to me as I've experimented learning different layouts over the years is the importance of practicing whole words at a time, or at least good syllables through bigrams and trigrams. It's so important to be able to type it fast that you can burst those patterns to the point where actually learning a layout, it's better to just stop, think about all of the keys ahead of time that you might need for your next word, and then just practice that movement altogether and bursting those keys. And this seems to be as true as ever for Svalboard, this idea of just firing out the burst for that particular word at a time until all of that muscle memory starts being built up. But this idea of if you make a mistake, delete the whole word and do the whole word again. Don't just backspace the last couple of keys and fix them. That does not ever work. It doesn't improve your typing. You've got to redo the whole word. But with Svalboard, you've got this extra process of fixing a mistake. If you do a mistake, it's worth really thinking why that mistake happened. Was it because you need to just adjust the position of the keys a little bit so that that fast movement means the keys land in the other order than they did? You know, that you can make those little adjustments to improve the accuracy. And that's kind of this process of working with the positioning of the keys, which is just such a drastically different way of thinking about learning to type on a new keyboard than we've ever had with any fixed keyboards. So this video is my first impressions take on this keyboard. Obviously, as time goes on, I may have other things to say about it. My opinions may change. This is my take on this after just coming up to 2 weeks with this keyboard. My opinion at this point in time is that all other keyboards are wrong. This thing is insane. This thing is the way keyboards should be. It's designed around your ergonomics first, and that point alone is enough to justify its existence. It's definitely not just a tool for worst case scenarios where you've got extreme RSI and you want to try and fix it. This is a tool, I think, to prevent RSI for everybody. So we should touch a little bit on price. I think, you know, it's interesting to explore these things. It's very expensive if you buy this thing fully built. It's $1,000 if you get 2 rollerballs and so on. I think it's foolish, though, to criticize things when they look expensive, when there is no competition. It's a niche product that has no competition. It's clear to me, after speaking with the guy who runs this business, there's no element of just overcharging for the sake of it. He's not selling huge numbers of this. This is a niche product. You know, everyone gets that. Although my take on this is that it's much less of a niche product than it looks like. I think the barrier to this is far less than people think it is going to be. But what's fascinating about this is this product is also available in kit form. So you can just buy this DIY kit and you're just left to 3D print all of the parts yourself. So you get the PCBs and the magnets and the wires and everything you need except the printed parts. So if you've got experience with a 3D printer, you can bring the price of this right down and much more in line with other niche custom keyboards like the ones from ZSA. When you look at it like that, I think that's an amazing way of looking at getting this keyboard. I think, a lot of people are looking for an excuse to get a 3D printer because there's some sort of uses around the house for them, and this is something I'm keen to explore as well. But this could be the best excuse yet to get into one of these. But obviously you do have to know what you're doing with the 3D printing. It's clear to me that the quality of this keyboard in terms of sort of little oddities of the keys firing in the right way and moving in the right way, the tolerance and the accuracy of your printing is going to need to be good to do this. But when you buy the kit, you obviously get all of the models that you need to print the parts and so on. So that's an amazing way of looking at this, and it's great that it is available in that form as well to bring the price right down like that. So I'm hoping to do a lot of more detailed content on this keyboard that I'll put on my keyboard channel. It's going to be a good way of me sort of resurrecting that channel, which has been a little bit neglected over the years. So if you're interested in this and you want to sort of explore things in a bit more depth, then that will be on the keyboard specific channel. I'll probably do another kind of more broader follow-up take on this keyboard on this channel as time goes on. And I've done obviously a lot of keyboard content on this channel as well. So do jump around and have a look at some of those older videos. Many thanks to all the members on this channel. Your support has been so enormously appreciated. YouTube is not what it used to be in terms of AdSense revenue from views. I'm doubling down on authenticity, creating this channel to be kind of what YouTube used to be. It's a sharing thing. I'm sharing my experiences, and that's what I think YouTube is so good at, and putting people in touch with each other who share the same kinds of takes on things. So that's what I'm continuing to do on this channel. It's amazing to see so many members coming on board. It really is helping keep this channel alive, and much appreciated. If you want to see my take on the ZSA Navigator, which is a rollable for the Voyager and kind of goes a long way to bring in this pointing device close to the keyboard idea, check out the video on the screen now, and I'll see you there.